Bill Carter is with us. It is Behind the Wheel.
Behind the Wheel.
Bill is from Autodata. We dragged you in today, Bill, because I haven't seen you for a while, so it's nice to see you.
Yeah, good to see you again.
First of all. But this is the time of year when it's particularly hot and humid. It plays havoc with anything that sits outside. Things tend to degenerate. Where do cars sit? They sit outside. So let's start with what we should be looking at. The first thing, and this was mentioned earlier on, we were covering another story about used cars, buying used cars. One of the things that comes up consistently, and they're not where they should be, is the state of tyres, and you have to be particularly careful in the heat, don't you?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, one of the things that people do not realise out here is that tyres are actually heat rated. So on the side of the tyre there is a heat index marking, and it's usually A, B, C or D. Now the temperature out here means we have to have the hottest rating tyres.
Right.
Now the problem is there's a lot of cheap tyres imported that come in from Europe, North America, various other places, and they're not suitable for the temperatures out here. So they're not heat rated for the temperatures we get. So that's the first thing.
Right.
And so they're highly dangerous because they will explode with the temperatures we get on the road surfaces out here. Particularly when you're driving. If you can imagine that if the outside temperature is running at 50 degrees, the road surface temperature and the friction between the tyre and the road means that's running a hell of a lot hotter. So if the tyre's not built to take that temperature, they will explode, and you very often see bits of tyres all over the road. And more often than not, it's because the tyre's not suitable for that temperature.
What's the rating we're looking for then, Bill?
I believe it's A, which is the hottest rating, and I believe anything that is C or below is actually illegal here.
Okay.
But we need to check the details on that.
And so there's that sort of grey market of tyres that shouldn't really be here, that people maybe buy to cut some cost corners when they've got to change their tyres.
Yeah, and very often you'll find them where the heat index rating or the speed rating has been buffed out. And that's because it is a substandard tyre. It's actually failed the final inspection, and they're actually only then supposed to be sold on to put onto horse-drawn vehicles, which are obviously very, very slow.
You don't see many of those.
You don't see
I was going to say, I was trying to think if I've ever seen a horse-drawn vehicle.
Well, no.
Yeah, I went to a distant place there. What about retread?
Same sort of thing. But I'm not a fan of retreads. I mean, they are legal if they're done properly, but there's too many that are not done properly. Hence, you see you can see a complete tread sitting at the side of the road where the tyre has actually thrown the tread off. Right. And again, that's because it hasn't been done to a professional standard. It's been done on the cheap. There is another scenario with commercial vehicle tyres where the tread actually can be recut. And you can actually recut a new tread into a tyre, and you can do it, depending on the make of the tyre, up to 3 times. Now, that's quite legal to do that. But obviously, the tyre should be marked to say it has been recut, so you can actually tell how many times it's actually been recut. But to say that only applies to commercial vehicle tyres, not passenger vehicles.
So assuming we've got the correct tyres on, the correct rating, I've bought, say, a car a year ago, I've come up to the summer, I've got the right tyres on, but what should I be looking at and checking or doing to get my tyres ready to get through the summer?
The first thing is always to make sure the tyre is at the correct pressure. Now, bearing in mind, with the heat, the temperature will increase, the pressure will increase in the tyre. So you have to be fairly careful about checking tyre pressures. Make sure they're all the same temperature. You're far better doing it before you've done a reasonable run on the road, because obviously the temperature will rise and the pressure will rise, so you'll get a false reading. The other thing to check very carefully is the sidewall of the tyre. If there's any sign of any crazing or cracking, get the tyre replaced. It's starting to perish and the sidewall will give out. If there's any lumps or bumps that are not normally there, again, what's happened is either you've touched the curb or you've clipped something in the road, and the inner plies of the tyre are starting to separate. It's called delamination, and in actual fact what happens is the inner plies will separate, and that's a weak spot, and that will blow at any time. So if there's any lumps or bumps, anything unusual, don't take a chance, because that's all that's between you and the road is the tyre. So anything that looks slightly out of the ordinary, get it checked. Very, very important. That slight mark or bump.
Okay, so those are the visible signs. But, when it comes to tyre pressures, Bill, I guess a lot of people don't know the ideal pressures for their vehicle. They vary from vehicle to vehicle, ever so slightly, of course. How often should you be checking your tyre pressure? And if you don't know what to do, what do you do?
Right, okay. So the bare minimum should be once a month.
Right.
Ideally, you should be checking them weekly, but nobody ever does, in the real world.
Yeah.
Monthly is the minimum you want to be doing. On the vast majority of cars, behind the petrol flap, there is a chart that will tell you what the tyre pressure should be. If it's not there, it's usually on one of the door shuts somewhere. But somewhere on that car, there is normally a sticker, and it will tell you what the tyre pressure should be, depending on the amount of passengers that you're typically carrying. So it will vary. If you're always driving around with a car full of people, it needs to be set at a higher pressure than it does if you're driving on your own. So have a look around the car. If you haven't got the handbook, 9 times out of 10 it's on the back of the petrol flap, or it's on one of the door shuts.
Okay, and it's easy to check, isn't it? You can
Very
go
easy,
and buy a tyre gauge or just drop in at a garage.
A gas station. Most of the gas stations out here have the pressure gauges that you preset. So you actually press the button till you get to the pressure that you want. You put the tyre nozzle onto the valve, and when it's done, it will ring. It will make a ding sound to say that it's reached that pressure, and then you know it's right.
Okay. Here's a question in for you. Question: starting or switching off the car when the AC is working, does it affect car engine or the compression system or any part of the vehicle? It used to be kind of commonly accepted practice, I think, that you turn the AC off and then turn the car off, and vice versa. That doesn't make a difference now, does it?
No, not nowadays. With modern AC systems, they're computer controlled, like everything else is on a car these days, so it doesn't really make a great deal of difference. The only point I would make is there are a lot of people who have got this habit of revving the car up before they switch off, and you should never ever do that. You should let the car idle, tick over, and then switch it off.
Okay, what happens if you do?
I was going to say, dare I ask why? I want to know why.
There's a couple of reasons. One, as soon as you switch the engine off, if you've revved it up, that engine is spinning at a very high speed.
Right.
Okay. Things like turbochargers, which most modern engines have now, spin about 3 to 4 times the engine speed. They're very, very fast. And because they're so finely balanced, they will carry on spinning for about 5 or 6 minutes after the engine has stopped. If the engine has stopped, you've got no oil pressure. So the turbocharger is not getting lubricated. Okay. So wear the turbocharger out quicker than anything. Okay. So why you should always let the engine slow down, let it idle or tick over, and then switch it off.
It's like doing a stretch session at the end of your gym workout,
isn't
it?
Yeah, exactly the same thing. It is. In
it, Tim?
It is.
That's it's an occupational hazard of mine. Let me tell you.
Let's move on to coolant and what we should be doing when we're filling up our engine. Well, people might assume I've just got to stick a bit of water in there. That's not the case, right?
No, it's not, and it hasn't been for a number of years. Modern engines use a lot of different metals in their construction. Typically a lot of aluminium alloy is used these days. Now, engines are not all made of the same metal. There are different components made of different metals. Now, what will happen is these metals react with one another. If you just have water in there as a coolant, it will start off a corrosion process. So then you end up with corrosion. The water can't circulate properly. It overheats. The rust will then start to break up and block the radiator up. So you should always have a mixture of coolant. There is a proper coolant. For a rough idea, we always used to say in the UK that all year round you run with 50-50, a mix of water and antifreeze. You can do the same out here, because the antifreeze has got a corrosion inhibitor in it. And it's the most important part is the corrosion inhibitor out here, because of this situation with aluminium alloys that corrode.
Let me ask you a question about when I'm at the petrol station, I keep getting offered injection cleaners and all these kinds of things.
Oh, good question.
Is there anything in that at all? Because I generally just sort of say, no, I'm fine, okay, because I service my car reasonably regularly, it's okay. But is there anything in
No.
Okay.
No, I'm so glad you asked that, Tim, because I always feel a bit stupid, because they always say to me, Madam, you should put this stuff in, do you want this? And I say no, because I think, I haven't got time. But are they just trying to sell me something, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's their job to sell it. I mean, in reality, if you're having your car serviced at the correct interval and time or kilometres, you don't need it, because that will be done as part of the service.
Sure.
You know, part of the manufacturer's scheduled servicing is to do all those sorts of things. If it was deemed necessary, it will be added to the service schedule by the manufacturer. So why are you paying for something that you don't actually need and has no visible benefit, if you like?
Okay. Bill Carter is here from Autodata, telling it like it is, as he always does. Bill, we're going to keep going in a few minutes. A couple more questions to ask you. We're looking at the things you know about, how you look after your car in the summer in this incredible heat that we experience in this region, of course, but also perhaps get into some of the stuff that you don't think about.
We want to hear from you. Find us on Facebook. Tweet at Dubai Eye 1038 FM.
5:52. It's Behind the Wheel today.
Behind the Wheel.
Bill Carter's here from Autodata. We're talking about the things that you need to know to keep your car on the road, keep it safe, how much you should be checking the pressure in your tyres. Number one, once a week it should be, Bill. Not many people do that, I don't think.
No, they don't.
Once a month at least.
Yes.
It should be. That's simply put. Do you know, during the break there we were talking and you came out with an acronym that you've worked for the Automobile Association in the UK, and it was simply this, POWER, right? This is a really nice little thing to remember.
Yeah, the word power. So each letter stands for something that you should check regularly, and we always said before a long journey. So power, petrol, oil,
Got enough? Okay.
water, electrics, rubber. So electrics are your lights, rubber are windscreen wipers and tyres. They're fairly simple. The word power.
I'm just feeling a little bit guilty because I know that I don't do most of those things, but I'm probably going to get my husband to do it because, there are some blue jobs, I'm happy to say, like Theresa May. There are.
Well, as long as it's being done is the point.
No,
though,
it's
isn't
a good point. It
Yeah.
is. And I think it's great to sort of bring up what seems relatively simple, Bill, but people aren't doing. Raj agrees. He says, very useful information, guys, about car maintenance. Thank you. He also says, small important tips can make a massive difference, including my stretching. It's true. And Bill Ron has messaged in saying, is it necessary to replace the timing belt on a vehicle after 100,000 kilometres?
It's whatever the manufacturer recommends. In the old days, going back to when I was doing my apprenticeship and working on cars when timing belts first came out, you would change them once a year. But obviously production methods have improved greatly, materials have improved greatly. The vast majority of manufacturers recommend the service round about 100,000 kilometres or 5 years, and it will be one or the other, whichever is the soonest. So check to what your manufacturer says, and whatever you do, if it's due to be changed, don't risk it, because if the timing belt goes, that's a new engine.
What does the timing belt do?
Ouch.
No, in simple terms.
Very simple terms, it connects the bottom end of the engine with the valves. So you've got pistons going up and down, and you've got valves going up and down. If the timing belt breaks, they tend to meet when they shouldn't.
That sounds nasty.
That's
It sounds
an
painful.
interface you don't want to hear in your engine. isn't it?
And you'll know all about it because the noise is horrendous, very short-lived, but it's terminal.
And then it's over. It's all over.
Yeah, it's a complete engine rebuild or a new engine.
Maybe it's a good time to talk about oil then,
Yeah.
because a lack of that can also cause similarly nasty noises, right?
Yes, and it's one of these things people are guilty of not checking, and you should do really. Again, modern engines are very, very good. They don't tend to use a great deal of oil, but if you get a problem and a vehicle does start to burn oil or lose it, then you need to keep checking it regularly, because once the oil level drops, people say to me, "Oh, well, the oil light will come on." Believe me, by the time the oil light comes on, it's too late. The damage has been done. The oil light means you have virtually no oil pressure. By the time that light comes on, the damage is done. So don't mess around with engine oil. Now, prior to the summer is the best time to change it, because your oil works harder during the summer than it does during the winter, because oil is not just a lubricant, it's actually a coolant. It acts as a coolant because it's taken away the heat from the friction between all the moving parts. So if the oil starts to deteriorate, it doesn't cool as well. It doesn't carry all the metal particles away to be filtered out. and so you end up with more damage. So a good quality oil, it must be the quality that the manufacturer states, and there's usually an API rating, or there are various types of ratings, but they will be in the manufacturer's handbook.
And you can't overstate, can you, the importance of oil?
No, not at all. An engine will run without oil 5 minutes possibly, maximum of 10 before it gives up the ghost.
Wow.
Totally and utterly.
And everything starts to grind together.
Yeah, and they weld themselves together, and that is throw the engine away. You've got to buy a complete new unit. Pure and
Okay.
simple.
Last thing on our list is air conditioning, Bill. In terms of affecting the car performance, should we sort of expect to feel sluggish in our cars at this time of year?
Yeah, this time of year, people don't realise the AC works extremely hard because to keep the occupants cool. Now that takes, on average, about 10 brake horsepower away from your engine, so the engine will feel a bit more sluggish. The acceleration may not be as good as normal. Sometimes you will get the occasional stalling even where the engine is struggling to drive the AC compressor at low speeds. So all that is fairly typical for this time of year. So you just need to be aware that the performance will be affected, and then as the heat drops away when we get into autumn, the performance will slowly improve. And it's not only because of the work the AC is doing, but it's because of the heat and humidity in the air, so the fuel doesn't burn as well. So you've got sort of a double whammy really. You've got problems like heat soak where the fuel is actually evaporating before it actually get into the cylinder to a certain degree. So all sorts of weird, strange problems where you can come back out to a car, you've just done a long run in, it's been running perfectly, and you go to start it up and it won't start. And it's purely because of heat soak. The heat of the engine is evaporating the fuel before it can get in and get burnt. Doesn't happen that often, but it can happen with certain cars.
Okay. Just a couple of quick questions. We've got about a minute to do both of these, but I wanted to ask you this. Can I use normal tyres instead of the run flat tyres on my car if I get the exact same size, is a question?
Normally, yes. It depends on the wheel rims. Certain wheel rims are designed only to take run flat tyres, and a normal tyre will not fit.
And run flat tyres are?
They are what they say on the can, basically, and you can drive them when they're flat for a limited distance at a limited speed.
All right then, and then Altex, what's the best way to break in a new car? I mean, traditionally they'll say for the first, 1,000 kilometres, don't drive over such and such a speed. Do you, Al says, drive it like you stole it, or do you go gently in it?
Drive it reasonably gently. I mean, if you actually saw the way engines were started up at the factory before they're put in the car, you would never believe it. Most engines are run absolutely flat out with no load for about 5 minutes before they're actually put into the car. And that's something when I was doing my apprenticeship you'd never dream of doing because the engine would blow itself to bits. But manufacturing tolerance is so good now. You don't really need to run a car in, but you don't need to thrash the life out of it.
Maybe don't drive it like you stole it, though. That's something else.
Not for the first couple of weeks, anyway.
You might feel great, though, if you're driving it low.
You'll enjoy yourself.
That's a different matter.
Yeah,
that's the answer. Here you go, Bill.
Lovely
what
message.
A wonderfully interesting man, says Judy. A nice way to finish, I think.
Thank you very
And
much.
we're assuming talking about you, Bill, not Tim.
Yeah.
I think that's a given, Bill. Bill